Hey, this vlog is going to be a little longer than normal. Normally my vlogs are 58 or 59 seconds. I'm going to try to keep this one relatively short, but it's an important topic. I want to talk about the moment in my career and in my development as an artist when everything changed, where I went from someone who was not content to be mediocre, but who had accepted a certain level of amateurism that I thought was fine. And after this moment, I became relentless in my curiosity and my pursuit of improvement, for lack of a better word. And that is when Scott Derrickson, who was at the time and still is to some extent my filmmaking mentor and a friend of mine, essentially told me, "You're not very good. You're an amateur." I had just made my first feature film, and like with several of my projects, I had gotten feedback from him, and we were going back and forth, and a lot of his feedback was specific. And I was kind of pushing back a little bit, and he finally just said, "I got to be straight with you. You're an amateur. This is an amateur film. This is visually weak and mediocre, and it is similar to the majority of poorly developed, poorly produced Christian content." And here's what changed my life. I listened. I resisted my urge to be defensive. I resisted my urge to argue, which is very rare for me. And I basically said, okay, this is a guy who likes me, who is my friend, who would love for me to be successful and good at what I do, and who is one of the most knowledgeable and talented cinematic students I've ever met or heard about, telling me I'm not good. So I have no reason to disbelieve him. And so I said, how do I get better? And I applied pretty much everything he told me. I read as many books as I could get my hands on that were about the process of filmmaking. I explored what my biggest weaknesses were, which at the time were for sure visual communications. So I read books on art, I read books on painting, I read books on cinematography. I, like Michael Jordan, in the off season working on his jumper, because that was his biggest weakness, I looked at everything that I was weak in and was obsessed with getting better. And to his credit, Scott allowed me to email him and text him continuously, and he responded to every one. And that's another thing that made me better, by the way, since then, is that I have done the same for others when they've asked me questions. The process of teaching and answering questions actually makes you better at your job as well. And I think that Scott would admit that some of our conversations actually reminded him of some of the areas in which he could improve and kind of shored up some of the things that he was working on and sharpened his skills. But that process of listening and pursuing and I would literally look for the filmmakers that I liked and not only watch what they had done, but I watched who they had said they were influenced by. So I'd read interviews with them and they'd talk about some of their favorite films and I'd go watch those. And I just became voracious in my desire to not suck. And that, I would say, by tenfold increased my improvement rate. I got better in 1 year than I had gotten better in 10 years leading up to that. My improvement rate in the previous 10 years was nothing compared to my improvement rate in the next year. And I'll never forget the moment when I sent Scott my next film. And I waited breathlessly for his reaction, and he called me up and he kind of took his time to give me his reaction because he wanted to make me sweat. And then he said, "I think you have arrived as a professional filmmaker." Obviously I wasn't at his level and I never will be, but he said, "You are now a professional as opposed to an amateur. He said, your first shot was better than any of the shots of your last movie. And it almost makes me emotional to think about it, because he even said, this movie isn't for me, it's not my kind of thing, but my whole perspective on filmmaking had changed. I now looked for opportunities to make every shot and everything matter. I didn't take anything for granted anymore. And that has improved for me every year since then. I mean, even the latest thing I worked on, I've come to the belief that everything matters and every shot matters, and I'm not going to sacrifice on anything. Even if it means I'm compromising on budget or time or schedule, I'm still going to make every opportunity that I have, every shot that I am taking, as good as it can possibly be. And so that philosophy of recognizing when you aren't any good and trying desperately to do something about it is the difference, I believe, between a professional and an amateur. And you will be an amateur as long as you are content with that. And the moment that you say, I am an amateur and I never want to be one again, and I'm going to take every conceivable day and every moment to get better than I was a moment or a day ago, because I have such a long way to go. The moment that you listen to someone who you know is better than you tell you that you aren't very good, the moment that you are willing to listen to that and hear that and not have it break you, is when you have a chance at being moderately successful.